Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know the historical and cultural backdrop to the Gospel of Matthew? During the lectionary year A, the Church focuses primarily on the Gospel of Matthew as the focus gospel for the entire liturgical year. It's important to understand where Matthew's coming from and when Matthew was written and why. Roughly from what we know about the gospel is it was written somewhere around 85 to 90 after Christ. It was a very turbulent time for the Jewish community. In the year 70, the Romans came and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple after a revolt by the Jewish people to drive out the Romans. Without a temple, a major identity crisis occurred among Jews. And this was, the big question was, how do we maintain our Judaism, continue to be Jewish, without the temple? Since 2/3 of the Torah applied to temple worship and temple practices. A kind of generalizing and kind of synthesizing movement occurred within Judaism, led by a group that took leadership in the centralizing movement, namely the Pharisees. And the Pharisees pulled the Jewish people together and began to give them direction and purpose in life, and also guidelines on how to be truly Jewish without the temple. Right? And so the centralizing movement, spearheaded by the Pharisees, began to impact all Judaism. Now, Matthew's community was a community that was truly Jewish at the same time, while it also accepted Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah. And in the centralizing movement begun by the Pharisees, they began to see themselves at odds with the Pharisaic movement that was centralizing Judaism, especially as it focused primarily on Torah and interpretation of Torah versus following Jesus and understanding and accepting Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah. And so tension resulted between Matthew's community and their fellow Jews who refused to accept Jesus as Messiah. And as a result of this tension, we have great controversy going on within Matthew's community. Are we still Jewish or not? Do we maintain our Jewish traditions even though a good bulk of our people reject our understanding of Jesus and his guidelines and his interpretation of Torah? Do we also, as Jesus would have wanted, open ourselves up to Gentiles and accept Gentiles into our community, despite the disruption it might cause in our own Jewish understanding of ourselves? And so what started to happen is kind of rethinking, if you want, within the Matthew's community about what it means to be Jewish and yet at the same time be a disciple of Christ, accepting Jesus as the Messiah. Matthew's whole gospel is structured around that key premise. In other words, what Matthew is trying to do is to tell his community that by following Jesus and accepting Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah, they are on the right track, whereas some of their fellow Jews probably are not, because in refusing to accept him, they're refusing to understand the scriptures properly. And so as a result, Matthew's community is in tension with fellow Jews, and yet Matthew consistently throughout his gospel gives direction to his community about Jesus and why it's important to stay with Jesus and not diverge from their belief in him. And so as a result of that, Matthew proposes a number of key teachings that appear throughout his gospel, especially as we read, focus on Matthew's passages, especially during the ordinary time of lectionary year A. What are some of those key teachings that Matthew proposes to us? Well, he begins with Jesus as, is, and has always been the long accepted Jewish Messiah, the legitimate teacher who brings to us the proper and full interpretation of Jewish Torah and law. And by following him, we are on track, simply because Matthew pictures him as one greater than Moses, and therefore his interpretation of Torah should be the interpretation that we follow. Secondly, Jesus is a faithful Jew who is faithful to Judaism, and we ought to be faithful to our own traditions as understood by Jesus. Thirdly, God, the picture of God, the Jesus God, is the God of all people, the just and the unjust, the good and the bad. God doesn't discriminate, and neither should we. We should always trust in God and trust in the community, because God has promised in the person of Jesus to be with us forever, at all till the end of time. And so we are guided by the presence of Christ in our community. Our relationship, ultimately Matthew's focus is our relationship with God is actually determined by how we deal with one another. Matthew 25 specifically states, "Whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do to me." So our relationship to God is always in relationship to how we deal with one another, how we forgive, reconcile, and connect with one another as members of God's family. And as always, Matthew says that that message that Christ gave us is for everybody, including the Gentiles, and so we should be welcoming Gentiles into our community. So, as we go through ordinary time and focus on the Gospel of Matthew, look for these key ideas and key messages that Matthew is trying to convey to his community and to us about who Jesus is and why we continue to follow Jesus to this very day. So I hope this has helped a bit to understand the cultural and historical background of the Gospel of Matthew, and I hope that you will return again to More Do You Know questions to learn more about our scriptural traditions and our understanding of Matthew's Gospel. Thank you.